What happens when a quiet barista with a hidden past sketches the wrong stranger, only to discover he's one of the most powerful, secretive men in the tech world? A single drawing sparks a viral storm, a legal threat, and an unexpected connection that neither of them saw coming. But behind every line she draws, there's something deeper and someone watching. Art secrets, betrayal, and maybe something like love. Want to know the full story? Subscribe to our YouTube channel now and don't miss a single twist. This is more than just a love story. It's the one sketch that changed everything. The morning light filtered through the wide glass windows of th1e9c Vemo, a small cafe tucked into a quiet corner of Asheville's historic district. The place had the kind of atmosphere that felt curated by memory, wooden chairs worn smooth by time, faded jazz drifting through old speakers, and walls painted in tones of dusky green and ochre. Local paintings and handwritten poetry adorned the walls, giving it the gentle weight of stories whispered rather than told. Clara Dunn stood behind the counter, her curls half-pinned and smudges of graphite on her fingers, evidence of a sketch attempted before the rush of morning customers began. She was in her late 20s, with a quiet elegance and the kind of presence that invited people to linger without quite knowing why. Her apron, loosely tied, bore the same tiny ink spots that marked all her clothes, no matter how carefully she dressed. Though she moved with the practiced rhythm of a barista, grinding, steaming, pouring, her eyes often drifted toward her sketchbook, lying open beneath the counter. The pages were filled with swift, confident lines, strangers caught mid-sip, couples in silence, someone's tired eyes, someone else's restless hands. Clara didn't draw names or ask questions. She captured moments honest and fleeting. Once Clara had been known among Asheville's rising young artists. Her early works had sparked interest from small galleries and one promising scholarship, but all of it unraveled in a scandal she never fully explained. Rumors said she'd copied someone's concept. Others whispered she was betrayed by a friend. Clara herself had stopped correcting anyone. She had simply vanished from that world and re-emerged here, pouring coffee, drawing quietly, and speaking little of the past. A bell above the door jingled as the cafe began to stir with life. Locals trickled in, familiar faces with familiar orders. Clara greeted them with warm nods and easy smiles, her sketches momentarily forgotten. She liked this part of her life, steady, unassuming, and wrapped in the low hum of Asheville's artful rhythm. From the corner booth, where the morning sun barely reached, her eyes flicked toward the man who always arrived at the same time, ordered the same drink, and sat in the same silence. She didn't know his name. He never offered it, but he had the kind of presence Clara couldn't help but want to draw. He always came in at exactly 8:15 a.m. Rain or sun, weekday or weekend, the man entered th1e9c Vamo with the same unhurried pace, as if the outside world didn't quite dictate his rhythm. He wore tailored coats, the kind made from fine wool with linings that caught the light when he moved, and never once did he carry a laptop or a phone in his hand, only a small leather notebook that he never opened in public. His hair was always neatly styled, his eyes hidden behind tortoiseshell glasses that looked vintage but expensive. He sat in the far corner of the cafe, at the table just under the hanging fern. No one else ever took that seat. Clara couldn't tell if it was out of habit or some unspoken understanding. The corner had become his. "Cappuccino less foam," he would say every single time, not a word more. His voice was quiet, low, clipped, polite but distant. At first, Clara didn't pay him much attention. Asheville was filled with odd creatures of routine. But the more she watched him, discreetly, through the steam of the espresso machine, the more she noticed something beneath his carefully composed exterior. He carried himself like a man accustomed to being invisible and yet constantly aware of being watched. His shoulders were always just slightly tense, like he was bracing against something no one else could see. What truly drew Clara in, though, were his eyes. They weren't cold, not exactly, but there was fatigue in them, not the kind that comes from lack of sleep, but the kind worn by people who have spent too long holding parts of themselves in. It made her wonder what he was hiding behind that neutral gaze, what stories he wasn't telling. He never gave a name. When Clara rang up his order, he simply murmured, "Put Sam." It became his name on the receipt, the chalkboard for pre-orders, the mug she always reserved for him, Sam. A name too ordinary to be real, and yet he wore it like armor. They never spoke beyond the usual exchange of order and receipt. But Clara began sketching him in her mind. How he sat with both hands around his cup, how he sometimes paused mid-sip and stared out the window, how he always left a tip precisely folded in half. There was something magnetic in his silence, something that made Clara want to break it, not with words but with pencil strokes. The quiet of the cafe suited Clara in ways no gallery ever had. Years ago, her name had meant something in certain circles. Clara Dunn, young, sharp, with a gift for capturing people not as they wished to be seen, but as they truly were. She had once won a regional art competition that put her on the radar of a few serious curators. Her winning piece was a raw, intimate portrait of a girl in motion, sketched almost entirely in graphite with smudges left in deliberately imperfections as truth. But just weeks after the win, the emails started. Accusations. A student from a larger school posted a side-by-side comparison between Clara's piece and an obscure European artwork, implying Clara had stolen the concept. No one had seen the original before. There was no proof, no legal claim. Yet online commentary doesn't wait for evidence. In whispers and hashtags, Clara's name transformed from prodigy to plagiarist. The foundation that gave her the prize rescinded it quietly. Her portfolio inquiries went unanswered. A friend, one she had trusted, distanced herself just as the pressure grew. Clara didn't fight. She simply packed her things and left the program she had worked years to get into. She stopped entering shows, stopped posting her sketches, stopped calling herself an artist out loud. And yet she never stopped drawing. Instead of canvases, she began to use pages from her cafe receipt book. Napkins, scraps of recycled sketchpads. She drew the man with the tired eyes sipping espresso, the woman who sat in the corner booth every Thursday, tracing her teacup with trembling fingers, the teenage boy who came in after school and always brought a book on astronomy. She gave none of them names, no context, no promotion, no signatures. Her sketchbook became a secret collection of silent portraits, truthful, intimate, anonymous. Drawing them became an act of quiet rebellion, a way to rebuild the trust she had lost in herself. Not for galleries, not for fame, just to prove to herself that she could still see people clearly, and maybe someday be seen clearly again. Clara never said any of this aloud. She let the world think she'd simply faded out, a talented girl who had grown tired or distracted. But every line she drew was a quiet promise to return, not to the art world, but to herself. It happened on a slow Tuesday morning. The rain was light but steady, brushing against the cafe windows in delicate rhythms that matched the jazz humming softly from the speakers. Most of the regulars had stayed home. Even the usual rush was muted, as if the whole town had decided to whisper instead of speak. Sebastian, Sam, sat in his usual corner as always, but this time he wasn't just sipping cappuccino. He was focused, leaning slightly forward, one hand turning a fountain pen in lazy circles while the other hovered above his small leather notebook. His expression was sharp but not tense. Whatever he was thinking about had pulled him entirely out of the room. Clara, behind the counter with a fresh sketchbed in reach, looked up and paused. Something about the light caught in his glasses, the way his brow furrowed slightly as if in constant negotiation with the world around him. He looked both present and elsewhere, as though he existed in two timelines at once. It was too much for her to resist. Without thinking, Clara reached for her pencil. She didn't draw him perfectly. That was never the goal. What appeared on the page over the next 20 minutes was part caricature, part observation. His shoulders slightly exaggerated in their straightness, his eyebrows drawn with a touch of ironic gravity, and his lips pursed as if holding back 100 unsaid thoughts. But his eyes she drew with care. Focused, distant, exhausted in a way that felt more human than any polished photo could ever show. She chuckled softly at the finished result. There was warmth in the humor, not mockery. It wasn't meant to be shared. It was just a moment, a study, a little rebellion. Later that afternoon, as she wiped down the counters and refreshed the daily board, Clara pinned the sketch to the art wall by the door. It was a small gallery of anonymous portraits, drawings of customers caught in thought, laughter, stillness. Her wall of strangers. She didn't label the drawing. She never labeled any of them. But as she stepped back and looked at it from a distance, something in her stomach twisted, not with regret but anticipation. Maybe he would notice it. Maybe he wouldn't. Maybe he would recognize himself. She told herself it didn't matter. And yet the next morning when she walked into the cafe, her eyes went first, not to the espresso machine, not to the register, but to the wall. The drawing was still there, but so was something else. A folded napkin tucked carefully behind the frame. Blank, clean, deliberately placed. Clara felt her breath catch for just a second. Then she smiled. She said nothing, neither did he. 3 days later, on an unusually bright Friday afternoon, the cafe was fuller than usual. The sunlight streamed in like gold, and the usual quiet hum had turned just a touch louder, filled with more voices, more new faces. Clara noticed it but didn't think much of it. Asheville always had tourists passing through, especially on weekends. Among them was a young woman with brightly dyed hair, an oversized camera slung across her chest, and a small silver laptop she kept flipping open between sips of iced chai. She smiled at everyone, asked too many questions, and complimented the cafe's soft vintage melancholy. Clara chuckled at that and offered her a second pastry on the house. The woman had paused in front of the sketch wall longer than most. She stared at Sebastian's caricature with amused curiosity, even snapping a photo before asking offhandedly, "Do you know who this is?" Clara only smiled, shrugged, "Just someone who likes cappuccino." Later that evening in her small apartment above the bookstore, Clara scrolled idly through her phone, fingers sticky with charcoal dust. That's when she saw it. A tweet. Then a TikTok. Then an Instagram post. The same image, a cropped photo of the drawing she'd made of Sebastian, his slightly exaggerated jawline and familiar glasses unmistakable. Beneath it, the caption read, "The mysterious man of Asheville, CEO, spy." Either way, the artist nailed the expression. Hashtags flooded the post. Hidden in plain sight, Asheville mystery man, barista with talent. Clara's stomach sank. The vlogger, now clearly someone with a decent following, had tagged the cafe. Within hours, people were reposting the image, speculating wildly. Some claimed he looked like an actor from a European noir film. Others joked he had tech genius energy. But the viral fuse was already lit. By the next morning, someone had commented under the post, "Wait, this looks exactly like Sebastian Croft. That's him, right?" Another reply came instantly. "Croft, the founder of EthaSec. No way he'd be in a cafe in Asheville like that." But then came the screenshots, grainy photos from tech conferences, investor meetings, even one rare photo from a magazine profile years ago. Different settings, but the eyes were the same. Clara's blood ran cold. The drawing was never meant to leave the wall, never meant to be seen outside these doors, outside that quiet moment. Now, her anonymous sketch was the center of online gossip, and worse, it had pierced the carefully protected bubble of a man who had never once said his real name. It started with a phone call. The cafe had just opened when Marina, the owner, stepped out from the back office, her face pale and drawn. She held her phone like it was something dangerous. Without a word, she handed it to Clara. On the other end was a voice, measured, clipped, unmistakably corporate. The speaker introduced himself as a representative from Croft Corp's legal department. His tone was polite, but there was no mistaking the weight behind the words. The sketch posted online has identified our client, Mr. Sebastian Croft, without his consent. We're requesting that it be removed immediately and that any related media, digital or physical, be taken down. This is a formal notice. Clara's mouth went dry. She managed to stammer out, "It was never posted by me. It was just a drawing on a wall." "That may be," the voice replied, "but as the creator you are still responsible for the source. We expect full cooperation." The line went dead. By noon, the cafe was no longer a sanctuary. Journalists had started showing up, first one, then another, then a small crew with cameras who set up across the street. They weren't aggressive, but they were persistent. They asked customers on their way in and out, "Is he really the CEO? Did she know? Can we talk to the artist?" Clara stayed behind the counter, trying to keep her hands from shaking as she served drinks, her mind racing. She had taken the drawing down the minute Marina told her, folded it gently, tucked it into the back of her sketchbook, but the damage was already done. The wall felt bare now, like something had been stolen from it, and maybe, Clara thought bitterly, it had. That afternoon, just as the crowd began to thin, a man in a sleek gray suit stepped into the cafe. He didn't order anything. He didn't even glance at the menu. He walked directly up to Clara, pulled a business card from his inner pocket and placed it on the counter. "Ms. Dunn," he said with a faint, unreadable smile, "Mr. Croft's legal team would like to meet with you. Informally for now." Clara picked up the card, heavy paper, embossed lettering. "Matthias Beck, lead counsel, Croft Corp." Her heart pounded. The man gave her a brief nod and turned to leave. Just before exiting, he looked back over his shoulder. "We suggest you seek legal representation of your own." Then he was gone, leaving the smell of expensive cologne and quiet panic in his wake. Sebastian didn't return the next morning, or the morning after that. His usual seat by the window remained empty, the tiny groove in the cushion still pressed from his routine. The mug she had always reserved for him sat untouched on the drying rack. For a while, Clara kept looking at the door every time it opened, expecting him, hoping maybe he'd step in and offer something, anything. Anger, confusion, a quiet explanation. But he didn't. He disappeared as quietly as he had arrived, and Clara was left to reckon with the hole he left behind. The internet, however, didn't go quiet. Overnight, Clara's social media, once barely active, had exploded. People shared the sketch everywhere. Some praised her artistry, calling her a genius for capturing a tech recluse with such raw emotion. A few went as far as to romanticize the encounter, spinning stories about cafe muses and misunderstood billionaires. But just as many condemned her. She exploited his privacy for clout. This is what happens when artists think they're above consent. She knew exactly what she was doing, fame-hungry and unethical. The worst messages were personal. Fraud then, stalker now. They were referring, she realized, to the old scandal. Someone had dug it up, pasted headlines beside her sketch, rekindled a fire she had spent years trying to extinguish. She stopped checking the comments, stopped reading the tags. At night, she sat in her apartment, staring at her closed sketchbook, her pencils untouched. She couldn't bring herself to draw. Not now. Not with her fingers shaking. Not with her stomach knotted with guilt. She didn't even know Sebastian Croft. Not really. She had drawn him like she'd drawn everyone else, as a moment, not a man. But now that he was gone, she felt the weight of that absence in ways she hadn't expected. It wasn't just that he had disappeared. It was the silence he left behind. And it hurt more than she thought it would. It was nearly closing time when she arrived. The cafe had quieted again after a long, tense week. Clara stood alone behind the counter, wiping down the espresso machine with slow, distracted motions. Outside, the street was still damp from an early evening rain. Only two customers lingered in opposite corners, their conversations low and unobtrusive. The woman who walked in didn't fit the usual Asheville mold. She was elegant in a reserved, old-world way, silver-streaked hair tied back neatly, heels clicking softly on the floor, a structured navy coat that spoke of expensive taste and quiet power. She moved like someone who had been in rooms where decisions shaped the world, and knew when to hold her voice just above a whisper. She didn't order anything. Instead, she walked straight to the counter and offered Clara a small, composed smile. "You must be Clara," she said, her voice warm but precise. "British, perhaps. I've been meaning to find the right moment to come." Clara stiffened. Her hands, still damp from the cloth, curled unconsciously around the edge of the counter. "I think you have me at a disadvantage." The woman nodded once, not unkindly. "Of course, I'm Evelyn Hart. I used to work with Sebastian, Mr. Croft, for many years actually." Clara blinked. "You're from Croft Corp." "Not anymore," Evelyn said, and there was something wistful in her tone. "I left the company some time ago, but I still keep in touch with him when he lets me. He's not particularly good at asking for help, you see, especially when it's personal." Clara swallowed, heart pounding now. "If you're here to threaten me, I've already spoken to his legal team." Evelyn smiled again, softer this time. "That's not why I'm here, dear. Quite the opposite, in fact." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope, placing it gently on the counter. "He would never admit it, but I believe he regrets how things have been handled. The silence, the withdrawal. He's complicated, as I'm sure you've noticed, but not unkind." Clara looked down at the envelope, hesitant. Evelyn continued, "He doesn't want to make a scene. He doesn't want more press, more noise, but he does want to talk to you, not with lawyers, just you and him, in private, if you're willing." Clara didn't answer right away. Her fingers hovered above the envelope, the weight of the past week settling like fog in her chest. "I'll leave you to decide," Evelyn said, already turning to go. "There's a number inside. He'll be waiting only if you choose to call." At the door she paused. "One last thing. That drawing, it made him feel something that's rare, and it frightened him more than you might guess." Then she was gone, just like that, leaving only the envelope, the hush of night, and the sound of Clara's heart beating far too loudly in her ears. The office was nothing like the cafe. Clara stepped out of the elevator and into a world of glass, chrome, and silence. Floor to ceiling, windows framed the skyline like a museum exhibit, and everything smelled faintly of leather and sterilized air. The receptionist had greeted her without surprise and ushered her in with a soft, "He's waiting." Sebastian stood by the window when she entered, hands tucked into his pockets, his back to her. The view behind him was vast and distant, the city a quiet sprawl of light and concrete. He didn't turn around right away. "You came," he said finally, his voice colder than she remembered. "I wasn't sure I would," Clara replied, stepping further into the room. When he did turn, the expression on his face was unreadable. The familiar glasses were gone. He looked sharper, harder, his features framed by the crisp lines of a tailored suit instead of the soft shadows of cafe light. She barely recognized him. "This isn't some kind of apology setup if that's what you're hopping," he said, moving to sit at a sleek black table. "I didn't ask Evelyn to find you. That was her idea." Clara stood her ground, arms crossed, clutching her bag like a shield. "Then why am I here?" "Because I need to understand what you were trying to do," he said, eyes narrowing. "Was it about exposure, attention, a viral moment you could ride on the back of someone else's image?" Clara's jaw clenched. "Is that what you think?" "I don't know what to think," he snapped, the sharpness slipping through his control. "You knew I valued privacy. You must have known. And yet you sketched me, mocked me, even, and left it for the world to see." "It wasn't mocking," she said quietly. "And it wasn't for the world, it was just for the wall." He scoffed. "A public wall." Clara's voice rose, brittle with frustration. If I wanted fame, I would have sold my story years ago. I would have fought tooth and nail when the art world turned its back on me. But I didn't. I chose a quiet job, a quiet life. I chose to disappear. So don't stand there and tell me I used you. Sebastian stared at her. Something in his face flickered, doubt maybe, or guilt, but he masked it quickly. You could have told me, he said after a beat softer now. You could have said something, asked. And you could have given me your real name, she shot back. They stood there, in the heavy silence that followed, two people with too many walls and not enough trust. Finally, Sebastian exhaled and turned back toward the window. I didn't expect it to affect me the way it did, he said quietly. That drawing, I saw myself in it, too clearly. Clara watched him for a long moment. That's all I ever try to do, she said. See people clearly, even when they don't want to be seen. Neither of them moved. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the immaculate office floor. The train ride back from Sebastian's office was quiet, but Clara's mind was anything but. Her hands itched for a pencil, something to ground her, but her sketchbook stayed zipped in her bag, unopened. The meeting had left her hollow and yet full of noise, anger, confusion, and something else she couldn't name. Regret, maybe, or disappointment. Later that night, unable to sleep, she pulled out her phone and returned to the Post. The Post, the one that had started everything. She avoided it for days, but now she needed to see it again, needed to stare it down like a wound too long ignored. It was still there, still being shared. The image of her sketch. The caption. The mysterious man of Asheville, CEO or spy. Her gaze dropped to the username. At Skyframe Art. Clara froze. It wasn't an anonymous vlogger. It wasn't a stranger passing through town. It was Skylar. Her chest tightened as the memories rushed back, uninvited and sharp. Skylar had once been her closest friend in art school, brilliant, charismatic, and endlessly competitive in the way that always danced just on the edge of cruelty. They had pushed each other, inspired each other, or so Clara had thought. Until the day her award-winning piece was publicly compared to a strikingly similar European drawing, an obscure image Skylar had casually mentioned in conversation just weeks before the scandal broke. Clara had trusted her, had even shown her early drafts of the piece. And then the whisper campaign started. Skylar never said anything outright. She didn't have to. All she'd done was nod subtly when someone asked if she thought Clara's work might have been influenced. All she had done was stay silent as Clara's credibility crumbled. Clara had never confronted her. She had simply disappeared from that world, from that life. But now here she was again, posting the sketch, reviving the storm, adding hashtags, feeding the fire. Clara stared at the screen, heart pounding, disbelief giving way to something darker. Betrayal, reborn and sharpened. There was no way it was a coincidence. Skylar had recognized Sebastian, recognized Clara's style, and she had known exactly what she was doing. This wasn't just a viral post. It was personal. The folder was slim, bound in soft navy linen, and sat quietly on the polished surface of Sebastian's desk. He hadn't touched it since Evelyn left it there that morning, insisting, with her usual gentle firmness, that he take a moment to look, not just glance. Now, alone in his apartment high above the city, with the lights dimmed and the cold quiet of late night settling in, Sebastian finally opened it. Inside were sketches, dozens of them. Simple graphite on paper, some no bigger than postcards, others spanning full sheets. Each one was a portrait, people in mid-thought, in stillness, in motion. A woman with weary eyes and a cardigan too big for her frame, hugging a teacup like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. A young man mid-laugh, his eyes closed, a coffee mug halfway to his lips. A little girl curled in her father's lap, one shoe off, head resting on his shoulder. They were anonymous, unpolished, real. There were no names, no embellishments, Just truth, raw, intimate moments rendered in swift, observant strokes. There was something sacred in them, like each drawing had caught a piece of a person's spirit and left it breathing on the page. Near the bottom of the stack was a sketch he recognized instantly. His hands hesitated, but he couldn't look away. It was the drawing, her drawing, the one that had caused everything. But now, seeing it among the others, it looked different. It didn't feel like a violation anymore. It didn't feel like mockery. It felt like he was one of many, one of a community Clara had quietly watched, noticed, and honored. The exaggeration in his jawline wasn't ridicule, it was character. The tiredness in his eyes wasn't exposed, it was understood. For the first time, Sebastian saw what he saw. Not the CEO, not the myth he had carefully crafted to keep the world at bay. Just a man in a cafe trying to disappear, and someone who, instead of looking away, had truly seen him. He leaned back in his chair, the sketch still in his hands, and let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Maybe it wasn't the drawing that had unsettled him. Maybe it was the truth of it. The unbearable, beautiful truth of being seen. It was early evening when Evelyn returned, unannounced, as always, and somehow exactly when she was needed. Sebastian looked up from his desk as she walked in, a takeaway coffee in one hand, a small bag of pastries in the other. "I brought bribes," she said casually, placing them down in front of him, "because I know you don't eat when you're busy brooding." "I don't brood," he said dryly. "You do, dear," elegantly but still, she replied with a small smile. She sat across from him without waiting for permission, her eyes scanning his face with the quiet precision of someone who had known him long enough to see the shifts even when he tried to hide them. "You looked at the drawings," she said. He didn't answer, he didn't need to. Evelyn leaned forward, folding her hands. "You know, Clara didn't just draw you, she draws everyone. That's what makes her different. She doesn't chase faces for what they mean to the world. She sketches them for who they are when they think no one is watching." Sebastian looked away, jaw tight. "She didn't do this to hurt you," Evelyn added gently. "She did it because she saw something in you that she thought was worth remembering, maybe even worth protecting." He stayed silent for a long moment, the air between them filled with something unspoken, regret, perhaps, or fear. Then Evelyn pulled a folded sheet from her coat pocket and placed it on the table, a hand-drawn flyer, inked by Clara's unmistakable lines. It showed a collection of anonymous faces, expressions of joy, fatigue, contemplation, beneath a simple title. "The Nameless Faces, a Portrait of Quiet Lives." "Her idea?" Sebastian asked. "No," Evelyn said, "mine." He raised an eyebrow. "She doesn't think you'll go for it, or that you'll want anything more to do with her, but I think maybe it's time you both did something a little terrifying." Sebastian didn't respond right away. He stared at the flyer, fingers brushing the edge. "I don't do public," he murmured. "I know," Evelyn replied, "but this isn't public. This is a corner cafe, a wall of drawings, a conversation." She paused, then added, "You've spent years protecting your name. Maybe it's time to protect your face. Let her tell your story the way she tells everyone else's, not through headlines but through truth." He said nothing, but the silence was different this time. Not resistance. Consideration. Clara didn't say yes right away. When Evelyn proposed the idea to her, an exhibition inside the cafe, a one-night showing of her anonymous portraits, a chance to reclaim the narrative, Clara hesitated. Her instincts recoiled at the thought of exposure, of attention. But more than that, she wasn't sure she was ready to share space with Sebastian again. But the idea took root, grew. And when Clara finally called the number inside the envelope Evelyn had once left her, the voice that answered was soft. No bitterness, no sharp edges. Just a simple, "I was hoping you would." They met at the cafe on a quiet Tuesday before opening hours. the first rays of morning spilling in through the windows. Clara came with sketches in her bag and tension in her shoulders. Sebastian arrived in jeans and a wool coat, looking for the first time, like someone not trying to be invisible, but not yet sure how to be seen. She laid the conditions out early, fingers curled around her coffee cup. "If we do this," Clara said, "your real name doesn't go on anything. No bios, no titles, you're just a face on the wall like everyone else." Sebastian nodded, agreed. They worked in silence at first, Clara sketching out how the display might look, Sebastian helping lift tables, measure frames, adjust lighting. He moved with calm efficiency, but Clara could feel the carefulness in him, the way he gave her space, the way his gaze never lingered too long. But over time, something softened. One afternoon, while sorting through drawings near the back counter, Clara caught him staring at one sketch, a tired father cradling a sleeping baby, lines loose and tender. "That one's from a Wednesday," she said. "He came in every week, same time. Always fell asleep in that chair before his daughter woke up." Sebastian's expression shifted. "You see people so easily, it's unsettling." Clara tilted her head. "Most people are just trying not to fall apart in public. I just try to notice the seams." He was quiet for a while. Then, almost reluctantly, he said, "I built my company on privacy, on locking down the parts of ourselves that people exploit. I used to believe that the less people knew, the safer you were. You don't believe that anymore." "I believe it cost me more than it protected." Clara glanced up at him, surprised by the honesty. He went on, voice low. "Years ago, I trusted someone I thought was loyal, a co-founder. She leaked our roadmap to a competitor and painted me as unstable to the board. I lost everything I'd built, and spent the next 5 years building it again, brick by brick, in silence." Clara absorbed his words slowly, the space between them quietly transforming. "You stopped showing yourself," she said. He met her gaze. "And you stopped showing your name." They didn't say it, but the understanding between them deepened. Two people reshaped by betrayal, now standing at the edge of something uncertain but real. By the time they finished laying out the sketches on the cafe walls, something had shifted, not just in the space but in them. There was warmth now, not yet forgiveness, not yet trust, but the beginning of something that could hold both. In the weeks leading up to the exhibition, a strange, delicate rhythm settled between them. Sebastian began arriving earlier before the cafe opened. Clara would already be there, hair tied up loosely, apron dusted with flour or charcoal, depending on whether she'd started her day with muffins or a sketch. He'd slip behind the counter like he belonged there, which somehow he did, rolling up his sleeves, learning how to steam milk properly under Clara's strict, amused eye. "You're foaming it too hard," she told him one morning, frowning over the wand. "It's cappuccino, not shaving cream." He smirked, noted, then paused. "But I did impress you a little with the latte art last time, right?" She raised an eyebrow. It looked like a squid. "I was going for a tulip." "Exactly." There were moments like that, light and quiet, tucked into the corners of the cafe. She'd catch him humming under his breath while stacking chairs. He'd catch her sketching him again from the corner of her eye. Less caricature this time, more curiosity, like she was trying to understand something unspoken. Sometimes, when no one was around, Clara would ask him to sit still. "Just 5 minutes, let me fix the nose this." He would sigh dramatically but oblige. One afternoon, as she adjusted the light falling across his face, her fingers brushed the edge of his jaw. He didn't move, but something in his eyes flickered, vulnerability or desire, maybe both. But just as easily as the closeness came, it retreated. Clara noticed the way he would sometimes pull back mid-sentence, how his laughter had limits, how certain questions made his voice go quiet. Whenever things felt too warm, too intimate, Sebastian would deflect, step away, change the subject. She didn't push. She knew that fear, The fear of letting someone too close, only to have them twist the softest parts of you into weapons. One evening, as they sat on the back steps of the cafe after closing, paper cups of tea between them and the sky turning indigo above, Clara asked gently, "What are you so afraid of?" He didn't answer right away. Then softly, being seen and then left again. Clara looked at him, and in the fading light, he didn't look like a CEO or a myth, or even the guarded man she'd first sketched. He just looked like someone still trying to unlearn a wound. She didn't say anything grand or comforting, just nudged her shoulder lightly against his. "I'm not going anywhere tonight," she said. And that for now was enough. The email arrived late one night, long after the cafe had closed, while Clara was cleaning brushes at her tiny kitchen sink. She almost deleted it. Subject lines like exclusive commission opportunity, confidential proposal, usually ended up in her spam folder, but something about the sender's name gave her pause. Skylar Madden. Her heart stuttered, then thudded hard in her chest. She opened it. The message was polished, professional, and too sweet in its tone, like sugar stirred into something bitter. Skylar congratulated her on the recent wave of exposure and claimed to have followed her work for years, ever since our time in school together. She framed it like an old friend extending an olive branch. The offer, though, was no olive branch. Skylar was now working as a creative consultant for a global tech conglomerate, Orionis, one of Croft Corp's most direct competitors. They were launching a worldwide branding campaign featuring portraits of their most iconic leaders, visionaries, innovators, disruptors. The campaign would be massive, multi-platform, international. They wanted Clara. And not just for the artistry, they wanted authenticity, narrative, the kind that only Clara could provide. There was, of course, one condition. They wanted her to include Sebastian. By name, by face, unmasked. They framed it as the full-circle moment. The anonymous man turned recognizable muse. It would make the campaign go viral. The contrast between her raw sketches and his refined, high-profile persona. Irresistible, Skylar wrote. The email ended with numbers, staggering numbers. A figure Clara had never seen next to her name. Enough to rent her own studio. Enough to walk away from the cafe. Enough to never worry about bills again. She stared at the screen, jaw tight. It wasn't just the money. It was Skylar, framing herself as Clara's savior after having nearly destroyed her career once before. Now, offering her fame and fortune, if she only betrayed the one person who had let her in and who had just begun to trust her back. Clara slammed the laptop shut. Her hands were shaking, from anger, from memory, from the cruel symmetry of it all. Skylar hadn't changed. She still knew exactly where Clara's scars were, and she was still pressing right on them. Clara didn't respond to the email. She didn't have to. She knew her answer the moment she finished reading it. No money, no gallery, no campaign was worth selling someone out, especially him. She never replied to Skylar. She deleted the email, blocked the address, and told herself that was the end of it. But it was. 2 days later, Sebastian showed up at the cafe earlier than usual. Too early. His movements were tighter, his steps clipped, and there was none of the quiet warmth he'd slowly begun to let her see. He stood in the middle of the cafe, coat still on, eyes unreadable. "I got a call," he said without greeting, "from a colleague. Orionis is prepping a campaign, global, featuring me." His voice was sharp. "Apparently you're leading it." Clara froze mid-pour, the milk in the steaming pitcher hissing angrily beneath her hand. "What?" she blinked. "That's not true, I never." "But they have the sketch," he cut in. "The one from the wall, and your name, and your style. They said Skylar Madden is managing the creative team." Clara stepped back from the machine, setting the pitcher down with a soft, metallic clink. "She reached out," she admitted slowly. "But I said no, I never responded." Sebastian's jaw clenched. You didn't think to tell me." "Tell you what?" Clara's voice rose, the heat in her chest finally breaking through. "That's someone from my past, someone who already tore me down once, tried to use me again. That she offered me more money than I've ever seen in my life to betray you, and I turned it down without hesitation. Why does that sound like something I need to defend?" He said nothing. Clara stepped forward, voice trembling now not with fear but with frustration. "You think I'd do that to you, after everything we've talked about, after everything we've built?" "You didn't tell me," he said again, but softer now. "And when people hide things, Clara, it usually means they're not sure who they are without them." She stared at him. "And you," she shook her head, laughing bitterly, "you never stop preparing for betrayal. You look at everyone like they're one step away from hurting you. You say you want to be seen, but the second someone actually sees you, you turn cold." There was silence between them, too sharp, too loud. Then Sebastian said, quietly, "You've never had your entire life ripped apart by a single headline. I have." Clara looked at him, her eyes stinging. "And I've had mine ruined by a whisper," she replied. "So maybe we're not so different after all." Neither of them moved. The cafe felt too quiet, like it was holding its breath. Finally, Clara stepped back, her voice low. "Maybe this exhibition isn't a good idea after all." And without waiting for his answer, she turned and walked out. Clara left the cafe without looking back, the echoes of clashing voices and heavy silence still lingering in her mind. For weeks, she wandered away from Asheville's familiar hum, boarding a bus that took her back to the quiet town of her childhood, a place where memories and old rhythms still pulsed through every worn cobblestone. In the gentle embrace of her grandmother's farmhouse, life moved at a slower, more deliberate pace. The house, with its creaky wooden floors and the comforting aroma of freshly baked bread, held stories of bygone days and a love that never faltered. Her grandmother, a warm soul with kind, weathered eyes, welcomed Clara with open arms and the soft murmurs of home. "You must rest, dear. Let the heart mend," she would say, tucking a stray curl behind Clara's ear as she set a bowl of steaming soup on the table. Amid the simplicity of rural life, Clara found solace. Mornings were spent tending to a small garden behind the house, where wildflowers nodded their heads to the tune of the wind. Evenings, after sharing dinner with her grandmother and listening to old family stories, were dedicated to quiet reflection. In that gentle isolation, she began to ask herself the questions she had long avoided. Why did she draw? What was the raw truth that compelled her to capture the souls of strangers? One crisp, golden afternoon, as sunlight poured through the lace curtains of her small room, Clara set up her easel by the window. The view was different here. An open field dotted with ancient oak trees, a winding dirt path leading to the distant hills, and the ever-watchful sky, vast and unburdened by the weight of expectations. She felt as though nature itself was whispering secrets, inviting her to peel back layers of old pain and rediscover her passion for art. With a deep, steadying breath, Clara picked up her pencil and began to sketch. This time, the drawing wasn't a hurried capture of a fleeting moment or a tribute to someone else's hidden pain. It was an exploration of her own soul. Each line was deliberate, each shadow a soft murmur of memory. Her hand moved with a freedom she hadn't felt in years, and slowly, a new image emerged on the paper. It was unlike anything she had ever drawn before. A swirling tapestry of color and form that merged the stark simplicity of the countryside with the intricate, unspoken emotions of her past. As the hours slipped by, the sketch grew into a painting that seemed to breathe with life. It was as if the quiet of her grandmother's home and the raw beauty of her surroundings had unlocked something deep within her. In that solitary, sacred moment, Clara rediscovered why she had begun drawing in the first place. To make sense of the world, to capture beauty in its most honest form, and to heal the wounds that had long been hidden beneath layers of self-doubt and fear. It took her 3 days to decide whether to send it. The painting rested against the wall of her grandmother's room, still drying in the soft country air. It was quiet, almost deceptively simple. A hand, Sebastian's hand, holding a cappuccino cup, fingers slightly curled, knuckles distinct, the familiar tension and stillness she'd seen so many mornings. The cup cast a faint shadow on the wooden table beneath it. Light streamed in from the left, golden and forgiving, framed by the soft blur of a cafe window. There was no face, no defining features, just the hand, the light, and a kind of hush that could only come from knowing someone deeply enough to let the rest fall away. Clara packed it carefully, wrapping it in brown paper, folding the corners with steady fingers. Tucked between the canvas and the packaging, she slid in a note, handwritten, no pretense. It read simply, "You don't need to appear, I still see you." No signature, no name, she didn't think he needed it. She left the package at the post office the next morning, heart pounding quietly as she handed it to the clerk and watched it disappear behind the counter. Then she walked back home, through rustling fields and wind-whispered trees, wondering if silence would come again, or if, this time, it might be met with something else. She wasn't expecting anything. That was the truth. The message wasn't a demand or even an invitation. It was a confession, a letting go. She had seen him clearly. And now it was up to him to decide if he wanted to be seen again. The morning of the exhibition arrived wrapped in a kind of fragile stillness, the kind that settles right before something important begins. The cafe was quiet, almost reverent. The walls had been transformed, Clara's sketches framed neatly along the wood-paneled surfaces, grouped not by theme or subject but by mood, smiles, silences, solitude, stillness. A handwritten sign on the door read, "The Nameless Faces, one night only." The place smelled like cinnamon and fresh espresso. Jazz hummed from the speakers, gentle and slow. The chairs had been rearranged to make room for visitors, but one seat remained untouched, the one in the far corner under the fern, where the light always fell just right around 8:15 a.m. Clara stayed in the back for most of the setup, nervous energy coiled tight beneath her ribs. She busied herself with small tasks, realigning frames by millimeters, adjusting the angle of a lamp, folding napkins, anything to keep from watching the door. But then she heard it. The bell. That quiet chime, the same one that had marked so many mornings. She didn't need to look, she knew. Sebastian walked in like someone returning to a place he'd never wanted to leave. He wasn't in a suit this time, just a dark sweater, worn jeans, and that familiar, quiet air that seemed both present and miles away. He paused just inside the doorway, eyes drifting across the sketches, and then he moved, slow and steady, toward the corner table. The seat was still his. He sat down, folded his hands together and looked straight ahead, at nothing in particular. Clara waited a moment longer, then stepped out from behind the curtain at the back. She didn't rush. She didn't speak. Her breath trembled just once before she reached the counter. She made his drink exactly as she always had, cappuccino less foam. When she reached his table, she placed the cup down gently. Their eyes met. No walls, no masks, no need for names. She smiled. So did he, just barely. No words were spoken. There was no need. He picked up the cup, took a sip, and let out a quiet breath, like he had finally, after everything, come home. The evening sun dipped low, casting a warm amber glow through the windows of Th1E9C. The exhibition had been quiet, intimate, just as Clara had hoped. A slow stream of guests had wandered in and out all day, locals recognizing themselves in the sketches, strangers moved by the quiet honesty in her lines, and a few silent onlookers who said nothing but lingered a long time in front of certain faces. Sebastian remained in his corner, quietly present, sipping slowly from a second cup of coffee. He hadn't spoken much, but his presence was enough, more than enough. The crowd had thinned now. Just a few people remained, and the cafe had softened again into its usual rhythm. The clink of cups, the low murmur of music, the sigh of the espresso machine resetting for tomorrow. Then the bell above the door jingled. Clara looked up. A young man stepped in, perhaps in his 20s. He paused just inside, gaze drifting upward toward the sketches on the walls. His eyes moved from frame to frame, his head tilting slightly as if listening to the unspoken stories between each line. He had that wide-eyed, hesitant look of someone who hadn't expected to find art in the middle of a Tuesday night coffee run. He caught Clara's gaze and smiled, a little uncertain. "These are yours." She nodded from behind the counter. "Every one." "They're different," he said. "It feels like you're not just drawing people, you're—" He hesitated. "Seeing them." Clara's smile widened, slow and quiet. She reached beneath the counter, pulled out her worn leather sketchbook, and walked around to the front, where the light fell soft and golden near the window seat. She held up the sketchbook, opened it to a blank page. "Would you like me to draw you?" she asked gently. Then with a small tilt of her head, she added, "I don't ask names, I just draw what's true." The young man hesitated for a heartbeat, then nodded, curious and maybe a little nervous. Clara sat down across from him, pencil in hand, eyes studying the angles of a face she didn't know but would soon come to understand. Behind her, Sebastian glanced up from his seat, his expression unreadable but warm, as if watching something familiar unfold. The cafe settled into its quiet rhythm again. A new sketch began. And just like that, the story continued.